Is an intro to biofuels by Eric and Will. We're going to focus just on biofuels. So biofuels are fuel produced from biomass sources. Biofuels often take place of petroleum-laced diesels. And then diesels, obviously, they power your cars, your automobiles. And there are three main types of biofuels.
First main type we're going to be talking about is ethanol. Ethanol is the alcohol in beer, wine, and liquor, and it is produced as a biofuel by fermenting biomass, generally from carbohydrate-rich crops. In fermentation of these carbohydrate-rich crops, the carbs are converted to sugars and then into ethanol. Ethanol is generally used for powering vehicles. Under the Clean Air Act and other government subsidies, ethanol was added to gas in the U.S. to reduce car emissions. Also, any vehicle with a gas engine runs well on gasoline blended with up to 10% ethanol, but car makers are also producing flexible fuel vehicles that run on E85, which is 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline. But most gas stations do not offer this yet.
Enthusiasm for corn-based ethanol is shown by U.S. policymakers, but is not widely shared by scientists. Growing corn to produce ethanol intensifies pesticide use, fertilizer use, freshwater depletion, and other impacts of agriculture. 40% of U.S. corn crops today are actually used for ethanol. Corn ethanol crops take up a lot of land. Growing corn for ethanol also requires substantial inputs of fossil fuel energy. These are just some of the reasons why scientists don't really support the use of ethanol. Simply switching from gasoline to corn ethanol would not eliminate our reliance on fossil fuels, which is a bit of a problem with ethanol.
The second main type of biofuel we are going to be talking about is biodiesel. Biodiesel is renewable diesel formed by reacting vegetable oils or animal fats catalytically with the short-chain aliphatic alcohol or ethanol. It can be combined with soybeans, algae, vegetable oil, among other things. There are different types of biodiesel depending on how much regular diesel is added. Replacing diesels with biodiesel cuts down on emissions, but it does cost slightly more than ethanol. Some benefits to this are the fuel economy is nearly as good, it is non-toxic, and it is biodegradable. Some have taken biodiesel use even further, eliminating the processing step that it requires and using straight vegetable oil in their engines, but this does require a modified engine. Still, most biodiesel today comes from crops grown specifically for that purpose, but this does come with some environmental impacts.
So the last main type of biofuel that we will be discussing is green diesel. Green diesel is formed when hydrogen is added to oil or fat, resulting in the quality of the renewable diesel fuel being significantly improved. It is chemically identical to petroleum diesel, which is just the regular diesel that goes in your car, but it produces up to 85% lower greenhouse gas emissions. And so green diesel is kind of a newer technology in terms of biofuels, so it's not widely used as much as the other two main types. So green diesel, we're going to talk about how it's actually formed a little bit. So its production is resulted from a hydrotreating of triglycerides and vegetable oils with hydrogen, and the hydrotreating process consists of three main reactions that is operated to remove oxygen, carbon monoxide, water, and carbon dioxide respectively. And now from here, we're going to go into the other two lesser used types of biofuels. A lot of times biofuel is formed using algae. Algae is very sustainable and more green, literally and figuratively, use of biofuel. So several of these organisms of algae produce large amounts of lipids that can be converted to biodiesel. Carbohydrates in algae can be fermented to create ethanol, and algae can be grown in a large scale in controlled and intensive production. It grows faster and produces more oil than terrestrial biofuel crops, and most importantly, absorbs carbon and can make use of smokestack emissions by absorbing the carbon, and then this speeds algae growth.
Another lesser-known biofuel is cellulosic ethanol, which is more sustainable than relying on any monocultural crop for energy. It is basically ethanol produced from the cellulose in plant tissues by treating it with enzymes. Techniques for producing it are under development because of the desire to make ethanol from low-value crop waste, such as cellulose, rather than the sugars of high-value crops, such as corn for ethanol.
So we talked a little bit about it, but now we're going to go to specifically what advantages biofuels have as a whole. So number one, they're a renewable source of energy. And with that, it releases no net carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And burning biofuels, however, does emit a little bit of carbon, but this is balanced by the fact that photosynthesis pulls the same amount of carbon from the atmosphere to create the biomass that's then used to make the biofuel. So due to this reduction in net carbon flux, it alleviates global climate change, which is very helpful in the grand scheme of things. And it is a cheaper solution to other alternative energy sources such as nuclear energy. And the nicest thing about biofuels is consumers will not have to really adapt that much. It's mainly a tragedy of the commons thing. Like, consumers won't want to switch and buy an entirely new car. They won't want to buy an electric car or a solar-powered car. You can just put different types of fuel in your car, and it's about the same price, so there is then no inconvenience to the consumer. And so then it's much more of a mass market energy source. And with that, it is really readily available. 98% of gasoline, in fact, contains some ethanol. And other advantages, it benefits human health as it cuts down on pollution, especially smog, because it replaces coal and coal firing and direct combustion. It can also help rural economies because in producing ethanol, a lot of times you have to grow crops. And so these crops then, therefore, give local economies much more money.
Now for some disadvantages of biofuel. Firstly, using biofuels still implements gasoline and diesel, which are large contributors to global warming and smog formation. Also, biofuels contain less energy per gallon than gasoline, and burning plant matter for biofuels deprives soil of nutrients and organic matter. Also, burning biomass for energy is not carbon neutral if forests are destroyed to plant the bioenergy crops that are used to form biofuels, or if we consume fossil fuel energy to produce the biofuels. Also, there are not many sustained bioenergy approaches yet, and specifically corn ethanol yields only a modest amount of energy relative to the energy inputted, with the EROI ratio being 1.3 to 1, meaning to get 1.3 units of energy, we must expend 1 unit.
And that wraps it up for our presentation on biomass and biofuels.